Ys 7 marked another evolution for the series moving forward. It abandoned the single-player gameplay the Ys series used in previous games in order to introduce a multi-party combat system more akin to something you'd see in Tales or Star Ocean, and it works extremely well. Ys 7 is also the last game chronologically to fall at the end of the timeline, aside from Ys 9, but as of the making of this review, Ys 9 hasn't received a localization yet. It is clear just how much of an influence the Trails in the Sky games had on the Ys games moving forward, as a lot more effort has been put into character development. I'll dive more into this in my review, but it's worth a mention. We've also already reviewed a game in this engine with Ys Memories of Celceta, which you can check out here, and I quite well enjoyed it. It is also the first game to seemingly not be related to the Eldeen or any of the lore surrounding their winged race. Ys 7 seems to be expanding the lore of its world, as the events of Ys 7 seem like an isolated event outside of the rest of the series. I expect Falcom is leading up to something with this, and with what I know about Ys 8 and 9 already, it seems to be building things up in an interesting direction. It will be interesting to see how these games tie together. So how does Ys 7 hold up? How is it compared to other games in the series? We'll sit back, relax, subscribe to the channel, and let's find out as we review Ys 7. Ys 7 takes the series in a very interesting direction. In a lot of ways, it really propels the series forward into new heights and tries to achieve new things that we are seeing the series implement in newer releases, and it works very well. But it is evident that Ys 7 was very experimental in a lot of what Falcom was trying to go through, and like other games in the past, they do have some kinks that they had to work out that were achieved in different entries, as a lot of the criticisms that I have with this game were fixed in Memories of Celceta. Let's first talk about its story and characters, which is arguably the best part of the game. The story follows Adol as he makes his way through the land of Altago. Many residents across Altago suffer from what is known as Iskin fever. It starts with a cough, loss of strength, and eventually leads to the victim becoming petrified. There isn't a cure for it either. On top of this, monsters known as Titanos have become more violent and frequent as of late, causing much distress for the residents across Altago. Adol is imprisoned due to a misunderstanding and is released as the king wants to talk to him. The king is aware of who he is, as Adol's reputation has started to gather a lot of attention from political figures across the world, as his journeys far and wide have started to reach their ears. The king tasks Adol with seeking out the answers to what's happening across the land, and on his way, Adol journeys to the dragon shrines to receive their blessing. The characters are great, and each character feels like they have their own backstory. While there isn't anything on par with Falcom's Legend of Heroes series, it becomes clear that the team at Falcom has strived to add more depth to its characters. This was something that I continued to enjoy in Memories of Celceta. One character in particular that really caught me off guard was how much development the character Elk had. Even though he played such a small little role in the game, his backstory and his motivations as to the way that he acted and why he wanted to go on the adventure with Adol really fit to his character. This would of course carry around to other characters, but that was the first real instance that I realized that this game was really trying to take character development into levels that the series had never gone before. However, the bulk of this game is way too padded out, and this is a big problem I have with the game. The bosses are bullet sponges, and I'll talk more about this as we get into the combat. As I stated, Adol starts out in prison and then upon release travels to the dragon shrines where he gets their blessing and ultimately allows him to access their power. This will give you various effects such as buffed up attacks and skills. It also gives you the ability to fast travel. The problem I have with fast travel is you don't get it until you are 2 dungeons in, and then you've got one more village to visit and obtain the last seal before fast travel is ultimately taken away from you and you're not able to use it again until you revisit the save points yet again. Most other Ys games gave you the fast travel at the beginning of the game. This made it easier to travel from town to town and pick up healing items, buy equipment, and necessary provisions. The one thing the game does to make this more manageable is most dungeons do have shortcuts that significantly cut back the time having to trek back through the entire dungeon just to do so. After specific events take place again, Adol once again finds himself in jail. The game then has you travel across the world through the shrines again to revisit the same dungeons, only to take on a much larger dungeon before with yet another boss. I get what the developers were trying to do here and go for, but it feels like it's padded out for the sake of making the game longer, and it makes it vastly overstay its welcome. It's actually a shame so much of the game's first act was slowly paced, and how much it just keeps going on, because the story, once it gets going, is one of the best in the series. Its second act has got a few curveballs I didn't see coming, and the game wasn't any longer than Memories of Celceta, but it definitely feels longer due to the pacing of the first act and how spongy the early bosses feel. Its combat for me is probably the most conflicted that I feel with the Ys games, all the Ys games that I've played. On one hand, I can really see what Falcom was going here for. They really seemed to have a desire to take the franchise into a new direction. And like with their other titles, it was a bit more experimental. But because of that, I feel the combat is so frustrating at times, much more than it needs to. And this, out of anything in the entire game, has left me more conflicted with this game than any other game in the series. So let's discuss the combat. Let's work out what's good about the combat, take a look at how it evolved, and overall how it presents itself in the game. Each party member has a specific type of attack: slash, strike, and pierce. Each enemy is weak against a certain attack, and utilizing these against the enemy is crucial to being able to defeat them. For instance, Strike works well against shelled enemies, while Pierce works well against flying enemies. This forces you to use other characters rather than just sticking to one, though Adol, much later in the game, is able to buy swords he can equip that come with these various different types of attacks. The combat plays well enough and keeps its fast-paced combat Ys is known for. Like the Tell's games, each art is tied to a specific button combination. Utilizing the shoulder buttons and the attack buttons, your characters will use a skill. This uses SP, which can be recharged by attacking enemies. You can also do a charged attack to build this up faster as it becomes useful, but it's annoying during boss fights when trying to do it in close range combat. I found it much easier to build up your gauge using a charged attack with a ranged character. You also gain minerals to synthesize weapons and items, and you actually have to gather them this time, which can't be done during combat. It slows the pace of the game down just a little bit, and I think Falcom realized this, as this was something they had fixed in Memories of Celceta. You simply collected materials by attacking them and picking them up. Guard and dodge work well enough and are easy to utilize. The bosses are where I start to have problems with the combat. The bosses are specifically designed to be bullet sponges, with a buttload of HP. The problem with this is while the bosses have always been typically taken longer to beat than normal enemies, they've never felt this drawn out, and the bosses do big time. Most bosses in Ys games can be beat without using items and learning enemy attacks, but it feels like the game wants you to use items. While it's definitely possible to dodge and guard against these attacks, it feels like the bosses throw way too much at you all at once. While this isn't a problem with most other games, it definitely is in Ys 7. Because the games have always been about fast-paced combat, the patterns are also not the easiest to figure out. This is added by the fact that the characters you are not controlling only seem to do about half damage that they would normally do when you are controlling them. Couple that with the amount of HP these bosses have, and it slows down the fight significantly. This, coupled with the game's already slow pacing of its story, draws out the experience way longer than it needs to be. Though it's better than Ys 5's combats by tenfold, it definitely is my least favorite mechanically. Something the later game actually fixes was its boss fights. The early bosses feel like they are just given a bunch of HP, but later bosses are a lot more fun to fight and have strategies and mechanics I've come to expect from Ys games. It's so weird as it feels like there's two different games put into one, that it progressively gets better the longer you stick with it. There's also this annoying part where your party members will fall off a cliff during fighting normal enemies, and if you need to switch to that party member, you won't be able to fight with them because you'll end up where they fell off. This made one late game dungeon particularly annoying, and I just avoided all the fights because my ranged character kept slipping off of the ice. Progression is handled much like it is in other Ys games. You gain EXP and gold to buy and purchase weapons. However, this time around, skills are learned from each weapon you buy, using a specific skill until it reaches level 1. Once it reaches level 1, you get to keep that skill and use it anytime you would like. Afterwards, it will continue to level up the more you use it. The game also incorporates side quests, though I'm not the biggest fan of how these are handled. There is no indicator on the map of where these side quests are, and you have to talk to a specific NPC in order to trigger these side quests, or simply just encounter an enemy on the field. This was again something Memories of Celceta would correct, as each pub would have a board you could simply recruit quests and then mark them on the map of the individual's location. Ys has always been a series about solving light puzzles or getting specific items to get past certain areas, and Ys 7 is no different. But once you acquire an item in a dungeon, you use it once, then you use it inside of that dungeon again, and then you hardly ever touch it. Most Ys games gave you a reason to explore and go back to use these items to find areas you couldn't explore before. This was something I think Falcom realized again with Memories of Celceta, as items received from dungeons could also be used to unlock other areas, though this might be a blessing in disguise because of how poorly paced the rest of the game already is. I just miss how much the other games actually incentivized exploration. This was an experimental title for Falcom, and it clearly shows. Ys 7 also has one of the strongest soundtracks in the series. Its music is an absolute joy to listen to, which is saying something since Ys is already known for having strong soundtracks. There really isn't a weak song on this soundtrack. I'd say it's my second favorite in the series, right next to Ys 1 and 2. Ys 7 has its flaws, and while it's definitely not my favorite game within this series, it does have a lot to offer. It's still a decent game all around, and I had fun with the time that I spent with Ys 7, and that is no doubt due to its characters and its story. I'd say the story alone is reason enough to play through this game, but I feel like some are going to have a hard time getting through it, especially if this isn't the first game that they're playing within this engine, as Ys 8 and Memories of Celceta execute a lot of ideas that Falcom had going for this engine and this type of combat in those entries. Aside from the boss battles, combat is quick and fast paced as it always has been. The story was enough to keep me engaged and pressing ever onward towards the end of the game's conclusion. Ys 7 was an experimental title, and while it's loads better than Lost Kefin in terms of how it executed those mechanics, its hiccups do detract from the overall experience. No other game in the Ys series has left me this divided, and while I would strongly recommend not playing this as your first entry into the series, I do think fans of the game should play it, especially if you're looking to complete them all. I can't recommend this title to everyone, but I can to people who are fans of the series and want to see how it has evolved over time. Ys 7 is a one-and-done entry in the series for me. While I had fun with it, I don't ever see myself returning to this game again. That being said, yes, Ys 7 left me quite conflicted, but I still thought it was a very good game. I'm going to hang up the mantle on Ys reviews for just a little bit, so we can do our Halloween special, as we will be starting to review the Silent Hill games. My plan is to try to get through all 4 of them and reviews up. That will come out through October, and then I want to, after Silent Hill 4 is done, return to Ys and finish up Ys Origins next, and then close out with Ys 8. And with Ys 9 coming out very, very soon, I will probably be jumping into that game shortly after. This has been quite an experience and a ride that I have enjoyed, and we're finally getting close to the very end of our Ys games, as we've only got 2 that we need to beat before Ys 9 comes out. Ys has become one of my favorite video game series of all time, and I've enjoyed the time that I have spent with this franchise. It is an absolutely incredible franchise that I recommend anybody who is an avid action-adventure, action RPG, or JRPG enthusiast definitely gives a shot. If you guys have not done so already, be sure to hit subscribe, ring that bell notification so you can stay up to date with all things JRPG, RPG, and gaming related, as well as check out the reviews for Silent Hill and Ys Origin when those go live, so you do not miss those. I'd also recommend, if you haven't done so already, to check out Digital Emilus. Digital Emilus is a great site and a great resource for people looking to get into the Ys franchise, wanting to learn what it is, wanting to learn where to start. It has been a great resource in my own adventures through the Land of Ys, and I am extremely glad that they've been there, and they've also been very supportive of the channel, so definitely give them a check. I will leave their link to their website down below. Facebook and social media links will be down below for those of you who want to follow me over on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter is where I am most active, and most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoons is checking out.